Bom dia a todos. A gente está vendo que tem um monte de gente conectando. Eu vou pedir para vocês mais uns 2 minutinhos só para mais pessoas poderem se conectar. Good morning. We are waiting another 2 minutes for people to connect. So I ask you for a little patience, and soon we will start the webinar. Hello, good morning, bom dia a todos. Em nome do tempo e do nosso horário, vamos iniciar o webinar. Avisando a todos que a apresentação está compartilhada, caso alguém esteja pelo telefone e precise da apresentação por e-mail, é só avisar que a gente envia e será em inglês. Então, vou mudar de idioma aqui agora. Good morning. My name is Tatiana. I, together with Fernanda, we are responsible for the Green Finance Working Group at the lab, the Laboratory for Financial Innovation. It's an initiative coordinated by CVM ABDE and the IDB, and recently joined by the GIZ, that aims to promote the debate between public and private on how to create innovative, sustainable finance solutions to leverage the market in Brazil and in Latin, and also in line to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. First, I would like to thank CBI for always being a partner here and also for taking the time to do this webinar with us. And also I would like to, in the name of the lab, thank everyone for participating and being connected here today. The webinar will be presented by Lily Day. She's a program manager at the Climate Bond Initiative, and she's the one that has knowledge on the Panda Bonds, which I always love the name. And I wish everyone a great webinar, and I'm gonna let Lily start. Lily, thank you for being here today, and let us know if you need anything during the webinar. Have a good webinar, everyone.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lily Dai, and I'm a policy program manager at Climate Bonds Initiative. So maybe start from what we do in China, just give you a bit of flavor of our China team work. So we have people on the ground in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and myself and an analyst in London. So we provide policy recommendations to China's governments, including central bank and financial markets regulators. That work started like 4 years ago. We are helping China to establish green bond markets. We also have partnership with market infrastructure in China, doing market analysis work to tell people what is happening in China, and we have our own China Green Bond database. And we also provide standards and certification in China. That is why we have a very extensive work of green bond verifiers in China. So they are domestic organizations providing services to evaluate the credentials of green bonds. So that's kind of the overview of what we do in China. And I'm really happy to talk about this, how to issue Green Panda Bond guide. So that was a joint project with IDB and People's Bank of China Shanghai branch. So we launched the reports last year, and after that, we also see some policy development in China as well. So, what is Green Panda Bond? So I think similar to other green bonds, it's bond plus green feature. But I think Panda Bond is quite specific in China's context. So it's a bond issued by a foreign organization in mainland China, and the bond needs to be denominated in RMB. So that's the renminbi currency in China. And plus the bond needs to be green. So the issuer needs to label the Panda Bond as green, and their proceeds are earmarked for green assets projects. And I think that's quite standardized approach for any green bond. And the issuer also needs to check and report on the use of proceeds to ensure they are truly green and they are aligned with regulations in China and some international practice as well. So that's basically the idea of Green Panda Bond. But because China's financial market fragmentally, so there are different regulations for issuer or for verifier or other market participants to follow in China. So that I will talk about a bit later, but then I would like to introduce a bit more about the overall why there's opportunity for you to issue a Green Panda Bond in China. So kick-off in 2016, China is now the world's second largest green bond market in the world, following the US. And I think the total amount is reaching 70-80 billion this year. And so far, for 2019, we have seen about 20 plus billion US dollar issuance, and then mostly by financial organizations, especially commercial banks, but there are more and more non-financial corporates. They are issuing green bonds at interbank bond markets or stock exchanges. And then for the use proceeds, I think most of the green bond are used for transport, because China is developing the railway system very quickly and they are very low carbon. And then the second is renewable energy. I think we all know like solar and wind, especially solar projects, Chinese developing them extensively, that the actual cost of solar projects has been reduced around the world. And then there are other use of proceeds, including water, waste, and adaptation resilience. So that's kind of in consideration of the climate change risks that China is facing. There are more severe floods, and they need to kind of think about how to adjust build a more resilient water infrastructure system, especially like cities in Shanghai or other coastal cities. They are facing severe climate change risks. And waste is another kind of main topic in China. We all know China has kind of closed the import from waste from other countries. So right now they are developing technologies trying to address the waste management issue. It's a kind of very big topic in China right now. And then, so what brings China to the kind of current state of the market? So China's green finance actually started from 2012 in the banking sector. So CBRC is the regulator of China's banking industry. So they already put forward kind of green loans guidelines back in 2012, 2013. So banks in China are required to disclose how much loans they're providing to green or non-green assets or projects. And then in 2015, that's kind of a big year for China. The Green Finance Committee has been established by most other asset managers, investors, but also other academia and government regulatory agencies. And we all know Dr. Ma Jing is the kind of leading person on that ground. And then there's green bond guidelines coming from regulators, including People's Bank of China, our central bank, and NDRC, who's in charge of the corporate bond market, especially bonds issued by state-owned enterprises. And then there's green bond endorsed project catalog coming out. So that's a guideline specifically for issuers about what is green. So there are green definitions, including projects such as energy efficiency, renewable energy, transport system, waste management, and adaptation resilience, and cultural, etc. And then in light of those two guidelines, China's green bond market was kicked off in 2016. And following that, we have a lot of guidance from different financial market regulators, including stock exchanges. They have, so we have two stock exchanges, Shanghai Stock Exchange and the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. They all have specific green bond segments. And later on, during the G20 summit in Hangzhou, China has established these national guidelines for establishing the green financial system. So this is jointly published by 7 ministries. That's a national guideline putting forward 35 measures to facilitate the development of green financial systems. So that includes encouraging green bond market development, but other products as well, such as green funds, green insurance, and green loans, of course. So in fact, I think there are more green fund in China. People are trying to work on together. And then in 2017, 2018, 2019, there are different relevant guidance coming out as well. I can go through this a bit more later. So that's very specific to green bond issuance. And then in 2019, we have this AMAC, Asset Management Association of China, putting together this green investment guidelines. So that's the first policy document encouraging institutional investors in China to invest in ESG or green products. So they also provide a recommendation for investors to consider either use the domestic green definitions from a central bank or other financial market regulators, or consider green definitions like CBI's taxonomy to define whether they are investing green or not, and investors are encouraged to disclose their investments in green products as well. So that's the roadmap of China's green finance, and that's the broader kind of policy environment for the whole green bond market in China. So in terms of opportunities to issue green panda bonds, I think other than the rules which provide very clear guidance to issuer and other market participants to issue green bonds, we also have domestic investors there who are increasingly looking at green investments. So right now, I think most investors are still commercial banks who is investing in green bonds, but there will be more initiative and participation from institutional investors, especially pension fund and insurance. I think insurance association, they are actively looking at this space. And then we do have a lot of service providers in China. So CBI has been working very closely with them from the beginning to provide capacity building. So like a lot of underwriters, Bank of China, ICBC, and verifiers, we have, other than those international ones, Big Four, we also have domestic consulting firms or SOEs or credit rating agencies that we work very closely to build the capacity to provide services. And stock exchanges, clearinghouse, we work very closely on the information disclosure side. And then another opportunity is, of course, the Chinese policies, which I've just go through. The broader environment, they really encourage investors to invest, and they are actually working on identify green investment opportunities. From, for example, Green Finance Committee, they're actively looking at that. So green bond is one product they are trying to promote, but there might be other financial products related to green finance or sustainable projects the government is trying to unveil more. And then, of course, for Green Panda Bond, because the currency will be in RMB, so we look at how RMB is being used for other countries for the transactions. So because the inclusion of RMB into the SDR, so there are actually a lot of RMB settlements in other countries, especially BRI countries, where China has have made extensive investments in those countries. I think including LATAM and Brazil, China has been invested a lot. So it's actually quite an opportunity for potential issuers in LATAM to use the capital raised in RMB to deal with the transaction with the Chinese counterparties. So in terms of how to issue a Green Panda Bond, so essentially the process still follows the normal process of issuing a green bond, but because of its China's specific regulations, so during the process, the issuer or underwriters need to look at other kind of guidelines to make sure they are aligned. So normally the first step is for issuer to prepare a issuance framework. So they need to identify eligible green projects or assets. Then just set up the process of checking the use proceeds and disclose information. And of course, issuer needs to arrange external review, looking at, normally in China's market, you look at domestic verifiers, but also other international ones like Ernst & Young, PwC, they can also provide services. And then when you develop or identify qualifying green projects or assets, issuer normally needs to look at the regulations, especially need to refer to the Green Bond Endorsed Project Catalog to see whether they are aligned with green definitions in China or not. And the second step is for issuer to apply for approval. So issuer needs to prove to the relevant regulators that they are qualified to issue green bonds, and they need to provide documents required by the regulator, and of course provide external review report. But that's not like a mandatory step, but normally Chinese issuer, when you issue green bond in China, they would do that. And it's recommended by regulators. This is kind of the step for governments or regulators in China to make sure the risk of greenwashing is minimized. And then in terms like what kind of documents you need to provide and who the issuer needs to reach out to, that depends on who are the issuer, like the type of organization and the marketplace that the bond will be issued, which we can go through a bit later. So that's so different issuer, different products will have different regulators and need to check different regulations. And the third step is quite standardized for issuer, so due diligence, and they need to structure the bond, doing the roadshow and the pricing. So that's no different from other markets. And the fourth step is, of course, ongoing reports. Issuer needs to continuously monitor the use proceeds. They need to provide reports annually. And in fact, Chinese Central Bank have provided guidance on the post-issuance reports. They have provided a template for issuer to use. So it's a very standardized approach for issuer. As long as they follow the regulations, the reporting should be fine. And then, so that's an overview of the regulatory system for China's bond market. I think I'm trying to simplify things, but there are actually if you know, we had this report and there's a very detailed explanation on who you need to reach out to when you issue a green bond or a normal bond in China. So if it's a treasury bond, municipal bonds, the regulators are Ministry of Finance and CSRC. And if it's a bond issued by central banks or financial organizations like commercial banks, issuer needs to reach out PBOC and CSRC. So insurance companies, non-financial corporates, and MDBs, they all have different regulators. And the same for the marketplaces. So if you issue at stock exchange or interbank bond market or OTC markets, you have different regulators. So when you are issuing a bond in Chinese bond market, you kind of need to pay attention to what kind of organization you are, what kind of bonds you are going to issue, then find the relevant regulators and check their guidelines. So this is a regulatory system for all the bonds, including green bond. So issuer needs to, you don't have to like know everything, but you need to know the information that is relevant to you. And then we have specific regulations on Panda Bond. So there's document from China Central Bank PBOC last year, and there's another more detailed guidance from the NAFMI and association under Central Bank. There's more guidance, a more detailed guidance was out early this year actually. So they all provide more simplified guidelines for issuers. So previously, I think for Panda bonds, they have more regulations, but now they are trying to simplify the process and encourage more issuance of Panda bond. So I think the main requirements for issuer include five aspects. First one, issuer qualification. I think that's kind of applicable for any issuer. So issuer needs to have experience, adequate solvency, capital, corporate governance, risk management. I think that's kind of very normal for an issuer to meet. You just need to submit documents to the relevant regulators. And then you have the application and registration procedure. You can find from their websites. They would tell you like step by step what to do and what documents you need to submit. And then information disclosure, that's a kind of specific to the to which market you are going to issue your bonds. So if it's in interbank bond market, check with PBOC's guidance. I think for green bonds or actually bond, you need to disclose information annually. And for stock exchange, it may be annually, it may be semi-annually. It depends on the type of organization. And of course, you need to disclose that you have the issuance approval and your bond prospectus, financial statements. I think that's quite, that's part of the normal process for you to issue a bond in any market. Custody and clearing might be quite specific in China's context. So because the capital flow and the capital control is still a, I wouldn't say issue, but well, a thing that China is paying a lot of attention to. I think that's why some issuers are a bit concerned about the capital withdrawal. So I think in custody and clearing, central bank has very specific guidance, and the ministry also have very specific guidance about this. So normally, an issuer needs to use a recognized custody company. So normally there are banks, and there's a list from NAFMI and the association under PBOC. They have a list of companies that you can use. And in terms of foreign exchange registration process, issuer needs to register under the SAFE. So that's the government who is in charge of foreign exchange. And they have very specific requirements regarding how to open accounts and cross-border remittance, and how you're going to file the information. And then for the issuer, you also need to set up the RMB bank settlement account, either overseas or in China. So this is better for the government to monitor and for you to manage. And then investor protection, it's more about the disclosure of information and a specific scheme to make sure the domestic investors are protected. So that's kind of the main requirements under the regulation on panda bonds. And then in terms of green bonds, so now we have go through the regulatory system, which is the overarching rules that issuer needs to check. And then the regulation on panda bonds. So if you want to issue a panda bond, you need to check the guidance from central bank and the NAFMI, the association under central bank as well. And then we have specific regulations on the green feature. So you can see the main regulations on green bonds, including central bank PBOC, CSRC, the regulator at stock exchange, and then NDRC, who's in charge of corporate bonds, mostly state-owned enterprises bonds, and NAFMI, who is under PBOC, but they are more in charge of the bonds issued by non-financial corporates. And then the regulations on green bonds, I think they're aligned with ICMA's green bond principles and client bond standards. When they were developing all these guidelines, we have been heavily involved to help them, and we have checked their draft, checked their regulations to make sure there's alignment with international practice. So first, the use proceeds, different regulators have, I think the main document is the Green Bond Endorsed Project Catalog. So that's the taxonomy defining what is green. So 3 regulators have been requiring issuers to refer to those documents when you decide whether your project is green or not. And the proceeds need to be aligned with green definitions in that document. And for NDRC, they have these guidelines for the issuance of green bonds. They also provide a list of eligible green projects. They are aligned. They're actually aligned with catalog. There might be some small differences, but it's another regulator, so they have their specific regulations. And then management proceeds, it's same in to any other countries or other markets. So either you can choose refinancing, so specific, and you can set up a specific account only for the proceeds from green bond, or you can do the earmarking, checking how you use the proceeds. And in terms of the reporting and disclosure, they are aligned with the overarching regulatory system in the bond market. So under PBOC, issuer, okay, actually that's more stringent than the international practice. So normally in the international market, we require issuer to disclose information annually, but under PBOC, issuer needs to disclose information quarterly based on their guidance and template for post-issuance disclosure. And for CSRC, normally it's semi-annually. That's a practice at a stock exchange in China anyway. And then for NDRC, it depends on the market, either annually or semi-annually. And under NAFMI, it's semi-annually. And the last requirement is about the verification or external review. So in all the policy documents other than NDRC, they only suggest you only encourage issuers to have external review. But in fact, I think 80% of the green bonds in China conduct external review. That's, well, in a way, it's kind of mandatory. And then regulators also provide guidance for verifiers, in fact, in China, so they can make sure the verifiers are doing a diligent work and they are qualified to provide services to issuer. So that's the regulations on green bond. So if you are going to issue Green Panda Bond, you need to check the overarching regulatory system in China to find out which regulators you need to reach out to and which regulations applicable to you. And then you need to check the requirements on Panda Bond issuance under China's Central Bank PBOC or NAFMI. And then, because it's a green bond as well, you need to check different green bond guidelines from different regulators. And these regulators, I think which regulators depend on the type of the organization and the type of the green bond you're going to issue and where you're going to issue. So that's the, I think the regulations you need to meet when you issue Green Panda Bond. And then I think this is an overview of Green Panda Bond issuance so far. So it's actually not a lot. I think starting from 2016, we have New Development Bank issued a Green Panda Bond, 3 billion RMB, which is quite large in the interbank bond market. And then we have other companies. I think they have registered overseas, so they actually have no residence in mainland China. So that's Beijing Enterprises Water Group and China Power Clean Energy Development, Hong Long Property. I think they're in Hong Kong, and China Everbright Water. So that's I think the Green Panda Bond issuance so far. And in terms of the normal Panda Bond issuance, we haven't seen a lot this year. I think that kind of depend on the market condition. But in terms of the policy environment, China is definitely trying to open the financial markets more, and Green Panda Bond is something they are trying to push quite hard. I think starting from last year, they are publishing a lot of guidance on Green Panda Bond. And in terms of the opening of the Chinese financial markets, 2-3 years ago, they are pushing a lot. And I think starting from last year, there are more international organizations who can participate in China easier than before. Like big rating agencies, now they can enter into China and provide services. And for a lot of international asset management companies like I think JP Morgan Asset Management has already entered into China's market, but also others like Nomura or other larger investors, now they can invest in China more easily. So the trend is definitely to open the market more and to attract more diversified issuers and investors and other market participants to deepen the market. So China can opening not only financial market but general financial markets a bit more. So I think that's the end of my presentation. So if anyone have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Lily. Everyone, if you want to ask a question, there is an icon on the platform that it's called Q&A, that you can send a question to her. Please feel free to do so. Se alguém tiver pergunta, pode mandar pelo botãozinho de Q&A que tem na plataforma, caso queira falar direto com a Lily, eu leio para ela a pergunta. Lily, I have a question. Can I ask it?
Yeah, sure.
You talked about the whole process and how the government and also the players in China are interested on the green markets and issuances of green panda bonds.
Yeah.
Can you share with us an experience, like how was it an easy task for someone to do it? Is it something that you followed a process with someone that you can tell us it was how it was, how long it takes? Can you give us some more like technical, like more detailed, not only the technical information, but how it was for the issuer to work with China? I think that's my big question.
Yeah. So I think when the market has like first started, it was a long process for you to issue green bond in China, because they're just in the middle of setting up the regulations and talking to verifiers, consulting with international organizations about the issuance. But now, because the market has been there for almost 3 years, in terms of the regulations, it's quite mature, so it's not a lot of work for you to go through. And because China wants to encourage more green bond issuance, they actually have green kind of fast track for green bond. So once if you want to label it as green, and then it should be easier for you to issue compared to other vanilla bond. In terms of Green Panda Bond, I think previously, before central bank and the association published the guidance, it was a lengthy process and people don't know where to look for information. But now they have very detailed guidance, so it's actually, I think, easier for you to do that. But in terms of how long, that I can't answer, because that depends on the issuer and the specific arrangement. For example, like issuer needs to decide which or asset projects they are going to use, and how many or how big is the bond, and who or which verifier you need to use, and you need to get the credit rating as well and decide which market to issue. So it depends on the issuer and the verifier. I think it can take months, or it really depends. I think depend on market condition as well. But I think it's fairly easy or straightforward for you to do that. Issuer just needs to work closely with the underwriter and verifiers in China, and then talk to regulators. And because they are encouraging more green panda bond issuance, so I think the whole process is easier than before.
Thank you, Lily. Another question from me. You talked about external reviews, and I can see the slide, the third parties that did external review. What about the certification from CBI? The CBI offer, like, can I certify a Green Panda bond using CBI framework?
Yes. So I only said external review because for China, it's a bit specific because you have regulations. So normally verifier needs to check whether the green bond framework from the issuer are aligned with regulations and some sort of criteria in China. So it's second opinion, but not exactly second opinion. But you can definitely use client bond standard and get a certification from us. In fact, I think almost every green bond issuer from China, when they issue green bonds in international markets, they get our certification. And in the domestic market, I think there are 2 or 3, I'm not sure like exactly how many, they already got our certification. So you can use our standards in domestic China, no problem. But you have to make sure you are also aligned with the regulations in China. But we have done kind of analysis on the green bond regulations in China and client bond standard, and because we are heavily involved when they are developing the regulations, so our standards and Chinese domestic regulations are very aligned. So yes, no problem for you to use our standards and get certification.
Thank you. I think that was my question. I'm not sure if there is another one. I don't think so. Let me see.
I do have one question, Tati. Here's Julia from Climate Bonds Initiative, Lily.
Yeah.
What do you think Chinese investors would look for in a Panda bond for Brazilian issuers?
Sorry, what they are looking for?
Yes, exactly. What do you think they are mostly looking for, the Chinese investors?
I think if a Chinese investor is going to invest in Panda bonds, they are looking for diversification of risks because mostly they invest in domestic issuers. But if they want to have more diversified issuer base, they would look at Green Panda Bond. And also, I think they're increasingly looking at green as a feature. It's more sustainable. They're supporting like sustainable projects, and because they are more kind of transparent, the level of details of the information disclosure are better than other bonds. So that's why I think domestic investors would look at Green Panda Bond issuers.
Excellent. Any particular sectors in terms of pipeline?
Well, I think for Brazilian issuer, Chinese investors are looking at I think agriculture. So that's kind of the big asset sector Chinese looking at, but not only for green bond, but I think also direct investment as well. And in terms of the green investors, I think they're looking at renewable energy, water infrastructure, transport system. I think that's aligned with what they have been investing anyway here. So buildings not really, but waste adaptation resilience. I think resilience is something they would like look at as well.
Thank you. That's excellent.
So Lily, I have not seen any questions on the platform. So I'm taking the note that your presentation was clear and that people understood how China has been investing and looking to increase the issuances of green bonds or climate bonds or whatever we can call them, sustainable bonds, and that there is opportunities not only for developed markets, but also for emerging markets to explore their market.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you if we can share your presentation with everyone later and your contact so that if they have any questions, they can reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. And also these reports, I think we can share as well. So if that they have more detailed information compared to these slides.
Sure. I think the Climate Bonds Initiative website has a lot of more information on every market, but we will share the how to issue a Panda bond and your presentation with everyone that attended the webinar.
Sure.
And keep the door open for them to reach out to CBI if they need any other information or any support if they're looking for the market in China. Really, thank you for your time and presentation. Thank you, Julia and Tati from CBI, from supporting us all the time that we we've been working together. And also thank everyone who attended the webinar today, and let you know if you need any further information. Lily, me, and Julia and Tati from CBI are here to help you, and wish everyone a great weekend. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.